Você dá um ok pra gente, tá?
It's okay, we are live now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody who's in Brazil. Boa tarde aos que estão aqui no Brasil. Buenas tardes. And hello for the others who are in other countries. So we'd like to welcome you and thank you for being here for us to continue our conference, Piauí-Iowa conference. And we are going to have a panel discussion about academic writing in other language in our postgraduate program, talking about challenges and perspectives. The guests for the speakers for this panel are Edison and Israel. I'm going to start by inviting Israel to enter. Israel Noletto is a professor of English at the Federal Institute of Piauí, Brazil. He's a doctoral candidate at the Language and Literature Postgraduate Program of the Federal University of Piauí, and currently a CAPS Fellow at the University of Nottingham. He holds a master's degree from the Federal University of Piauí in Language and Literature, and a diploma in English Language and Literature from the State University of Piauí. He's the author of several scholarly papers written in English on English language literature and glossal poesis. Thank you, Israel, for being here. And I'd like to invite Edison. So, Edison, I'm sorry you haven't written your full name. So, sorry, that's me. Edison Ángel Castrillón, right?
Castrillón.
Castrillón, sorry. Edison Ángel Castrillón. Edison holds a degree in social communication journalism from Universidad Minuto de Dios Bello in Colombia. He has a specialization in the teaching in English language teaching and a master's in procesos de aprendizaje y enseñanza de segundas lenguas by the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana Medellín in Colombia. Presently, he's the director and founder of Translanguage, SAS. He's a professor and researcher from Universidad Católica Luis Amigo Medellín in Colombia. He has done an academic, has gone through an academic exchange at Universidade do Vale do Taquari, Univates in Brazil in 2015. And he's also a doctorate candidate at our program here in the Language and Literature program from Universidade Federal do Piauí. He is an experienced professional in the area of communication with emphasis on edu-communication and digital critical literacy. So I'd like to welcome you, Edison, in this panel, in our talking here. And we are going to talk. Okay, we are going to talk. So first of all, I'd like to each one of you to talk about the process of developing academic writing skills, because neither of us here, we are not native speakers. Okay, English native speakers. So this is something that most English learners from any country, okay, from other who speak other languages as their mother language, recognize as a difficult task, as a difficult skill to develop. So I'd like each one of you to talk about that. So to talk about this process of developing this skill, okay, that of writing academically in English. Please.
Can I go first?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, as for any other skills in as far as language proficiency is concerned, writing also requires a great amount of effort. I usually say that you have to start writing, and as you write, as much as you write, the more you write, the better you get at it. So something you have to do is to develop your confidence and try. I remember many years ago when I was trying to get my first papers published in English, that I faced one problem. Many of the journals back then had this requirement that you should have to write in your own language. So you'd only write in English if you were a native speaker of English. Me, as a native speaker of Portuguese, would have to write in Portuguese, regardless of what I wanted to do. And despite that, I started writing and developing my abilities and not having anything published. But I got to the point of writing several papers, and I took the time to develop the contents of those papers. So when I entered the master's degree in 2016 at UFPI, I had got past me one other obstacle I already had back then, which was I didn't have the right diplomas in order to get published in any other journals, especially journals in other countries than Brazil. So although I hadn't published anything yet, I had already written several texts. So when I entered the postgraduate program, I had a few texts I could work on, already written in English, that I would have now someone to help me with, my supervisor, and get them published. So I did succeed in that. In 2017, I published my first ever article written in English in a foreign journal. The foreign journal didn't have any specification that you should have to write in your own native language because they only published in English. So anyone approaching that journal and submitting an article to that journal would have to do that in English. So I managed to get that one published. And after that, many other articles followed. But what I had to do to get to the point of getting published was to write as much as I could. Although I wasn't actually submitting many texts to different journals because of the requirement of me being a native speaker of English to submit anything to Brazilian journals, I was writing as much as I could. And that helped me to develop my writing abilities. I was always reading, I was always writing, and for you to write any article, you have to read a lot. You read the exact same kind of text that you'll be writing about. So as much as I read, I kept finding chunks of language, and I was coming across many different academic styles, and that helped me a lot to develop my own abilities by reading and by mirroring the abilities and styles of other writers that I looked up to. And as I said, although I wasn't publishing anything, the time I invested in reading and writing helped me get to the point of being published as soon as I entered the postgraduate program at UFPI.
Your microphone, Professor.
Thank you. So thank you so much for sharing about your experiences. Okay, Israel, it's very good. And it is interesting because we have here a literature doctorate candidate, and now we are going to listen to a linguistics, okay, and applied linguistics doctorate candidate. So please, Edison.
Well, thank you so much. I really want to thanks to Professor Josivan, to Professor Beatriz, and Professor Israel, and all the people who organized this special event, because this kind of thing help us to increase not just our writing skills, but also our literacy skills in terms of promoting and improve our teaching, learning, speaking, writing skills. Specifically, we are focusing here in writing skills. But from my own experience, I remember I need to talk when I was a child. I remember the first time when I was writing, it was my father trying to teach me how to write, how to decode, how to encode those graphemes. Yes, and it helped me a lot to recognize that I remember that I tried to write, and then from, I don't know, 5-6 years old, I start analyzing a process that goes beyond the decodification or encodification process, because I remember the word luna, that is lua, moon. Yeah, in Spanish, luna. And I remember that those simple words helps me to recognize a circle on the sea, on the sky. Yes, and to recognize that specific things like imagines. So that's why I start working with a social communication and journalist. There I improved, of course, some academic skills in terms of how to make reports, how to report a news, something like that. Yes, and it was helpful for me because I learned not just how to write, but also how to find the specific literature, yes, the testimonials in order to answer to a specific situation. And there, I remember that specific things, but it was useful for me at that time because I used Spanish. But when I start writing specifically in English, I found difficult situations. I mean, because for me, that, for example, moon, it doesn't mean the same that Luna for me. It didn't mean the same for me. Yes. So it was so complicated to fight with my native language, that it was a language that I could feel, that I could enjoy, that I could illustrate, that I could compare. But when I was studying that process of writing and reading, specifically with a foreign language, I didn't feel that specific process. It was like a far away of me. I thought like I felt like this is not mine. Yeah, like that kind of process. But then I started the or to write as a native speaker. So I designed to write following, of course, the requirements of every single a published house or something like that. But also I tried to like how can I say, like have my essence. Yes, like trying to express the ideas without failing, without losing that specific feelings. So that is something that today, obviously, it's so heavy for me because it's not easy. Because sometimes we sent a paper and the reviewers said, okay, no, it is because it is not the English that we pretend to publish. Yeah, so that is like a kind of exclusion. Yes, like my goodness. So do you pretend that the only the English or the only English that we need to talk is the British or the American English? Yes. So what is the English that I need to talk? Because if I am talking about British English, I can feel my English. Because it happened to me even with my native language from the very beginning of my literacy process. So in that way, that is something to start summarizing this interesting conversation. But that happened to me. For me, it's difficult to follow some structures that don't identify me like a writer and like a reader. Yeah, that is the point of view.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So both of you talked a lot. You used the word in your talk. You said a lot process. Okay, and like Israel emphasized more this process of like observing and like getting used to. Okay, getting used to start writing and write like practice brings. Okay, perfection, right? People ask, there is the same. And Edson talked about this process, and Edson mentioned what I was going to ask now. Okay, and I'm going to this issue of identity. Okay, because this is a complicated, and I think it's even more complicated, I would say, in literature, because Israel, when you are writing as a Brazilian researcher, for example, who does research in literature, and if you are analyzing writers who write in Portuguese, but then you have to write your papers in English in order to be published many times, or at least you want them to be published in a more international way. So how is that process as a literature researcher? Okay. And for Edson, I'll have another question more related to that you talked about identity. Okay. But this is more like to Israel, because I did my master's in literature, and I analyzed Camilo Castelo Branco, que é a Portuguese writer. So, and I wrote in Portuguese. And nowadays I think, what would I do if I had to write my master's thesis in English? It would have been difficult, especially when I had to analyze the original writings of Camilo Castelo Branco. Please.
That's a very interesting issue, actually, because although I am a Brazilian researcher, I write in English and I research Anglophone literature.
Okay.
Yes, most of my published papers actually analyze literature published in English originally. For example, my master's thesis was about a Asian writer who wrote in English, Ted Chiang. He is an American writer with Asian descent, and you can see matters of identity in his writings, but not specifically the one I wrote about in my master's degree, but you can see issues of identity there. And one thing I could add to that issue in here, for example, I'm writing about several Anglophone pieces of literature in my doctoral thesis, and one of the writers I am writing about is actually from here, the city of Nottingham. And he mentions many cities around Nottingham. Nottingham is like a center, and around Nottingham there are many other smaller cities. And he mentions many of the cities around Nottingham. And when you read the text and you don't know the geography in here, you don't actually grasp the whole meaning of what he's saying. You can't have access to the cultural charge that is imbued in the literature. And that is an extra challenge you have as a non-native speaker of English. And even if I were a native speaker of English, but for example, I were American, I wouldn't have the cultural charge necessary to analyze deeply the texts that this one writer wrote. So as part of my own journey as a researcher, for this specific piece of research, I visited many of the cities he writes about in his texts. One of them, for example, Loughborough, which is just outside Nottingham. When you visit it, you get to see what he meant in many ways when he described a future dystopian Loughborough in which many of the nice things about the city got destroyed and replaced with worse things. It is a very lovely city, small city with typical British cottage houses. And when you get there, you can realize what was lost in the dystopian future that this writer wrote about. I'm going to go and mention his name. It's Brian Aldiss. He wrote many prominent science fiction texts, and this one text I'm talking about is Barefoot in the Head. And this one city, Loughborough, is prominent in this text. But another one that I also analyze in my doctoral thesis, it talks about cities in the south of England and in the Midlands, East Midlands of England. And he writes about Canterbury and other cities in the neighborhood of Canterbury. So as part of my journey researching these texts, I also visit some of these cities, and I get to see what the writer saw when he wrote about them and these places in his texts. And then I can have this kind of connection and relatability with the texts. In this one text, Ridley Walker, that writes about Canterbury and the other cities around, you get to see what is lost in the dystopian future. You get to see what there is right now, what the author knew there was in his time, and what is lost in the text he writes about. And this is a way to get relatability with the text. And this is something you can't have unless you experience the places, the same places as the writer visited, or the writer knew, or the writer lived in. So this issue of identity is a difficult one to tackle because of that. If you don't have the access to the same situations, the same experiences, or similar experiences to the writers, you don't have the same level of connection with the text that you could have if you had the opportunity to see the places the writers write about through their own eyes or through similar eyes. So for me, this experience I'm having right now as a CAPS fellow in Nottingham, it's essential to what I've been researching about. If I didn't have this opportunity, this issue of identity would be more prominent to me, would be more difficult to get behind me. But since I'm having this opportunity right now, this is something that softens the problem that I have to tackle. But anyway, I still have this other issue concerning identity, that I'm not writing in my own language. But this, as my supervisor in here mentions, it is an extra interesting feature of my research, because I'm giving the perspective of an outsider. And I'm researching about fictional dialects of English. And the writers wrote about fictional dialects of English, that future dialects of English that they invented to feature in their works. So any reader, any native speaker of English that reads these texts, they will have a similar approach that I do. They will see the texts as foreign because it is in a future stage of development of English. But I have it even more so, because in addition to not being a native speaker of English, I see a future form of English presented by these authors. So I'd say it is an issue that actually deepens the complexity of my research, and actually adds something interesting to the outcome of the research.
I agree with you. I think this is something that has to be considered. And I'm going to ask a question to Edison, and then I will return to you. And I'd like, Israel, you to try to talk to us, remembering, coding, other researchers you know from literature who do their research using Brazilian or Portuguese, I don't know, authors who write in Portuguese, for example, or in if you want to use other language, but have to publish in English or want to publish in English. I don't know. We are going to talk about this have to publish in English later. But so I'd like if to you to share with us about this. If you, for example, or your people who study at our program that you know, your friends, okay, your classmates, okay, who study with you in the doctorate program, but in the literature, and have to do this or do this because they want to, how they do it. Okay, so I'll return on that later. But now, Edison, please. So you talked about something that is very, very challenging. Okay, so our identity is foreigners. Okay, we are foreigners. Okay, English is not our first language, so we approach English not as our mother language, but as a foreign or as an additional language or a second language for some people. Okay, so you mentioned the identity, and I agree with you. I also remember when I was a child, when I was learning English, it was difficult for me, especially when I had like this. I was a child, so these concrete things that I had to understand that they were other things in English. Okay, it was a little difficult for me. And so, what advice would you give for people who are watching us and, for example, who are now at the undergraduate students? Okay, so what do you think, how could they try to tackle, it's difficult to tackle this problem, okay, totally, it's almost impossible, I'd say, but what kind of advice would you give them? For example, our students at the Piauí University, Federal University of Piauí, they have to write their final papers. If they are English undergraduate students, they have to write their final paper in English. So what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, I think that when we are writing, and as you said, Professor, we cannot lose our sense. We cannot lose our ideas because we could express happiness, we could express injustices about one specific event and something, and we need to express it, of course. Yes. Something, for example, that calls my attention specifically is when I am speaking. When I am speaking, I used to express all my feelings, even without words. Yes. But when you are writing, you cannot lose those specific emotions. Yeah, you need to write about, you need to express that emotions, because we need to analyze, we need to identify something is the syntaxes, yes, the specific that writing language and something like that, but also write a letter, write an abstract, write a paper also has our feelings. So in that way, you need to use the language, that foreign language, as an excuse to express your feelings, to express your opinions, to express your ideas. The linguistic field, it the second step. That is the second step. Yeah, from my own perception, because, well, something that we need to take into account is that writing a language, it doesn't matter if it's an additional, a foreign language, it goes beyond the linguistic field. It goes beyond. Yes. In that language, we need to analyze those social linguistic aspects, that cultural aspects, that specific aspects. And we need to try to express our ideas there. Because, yeah, if you pay attention a lot to the linguistic part, you could miss or lose the emotions, the main ideas. I'm going to try with an example. when I am writing about something, I used to write, well, in English or Portuguese or Spanish, but I try to express my ideas immediately. I don't pay attention if that word was very well writing or reading something like that. No, I used to express my idea first, because on the contrary, I lose my idea. So that is one of the advice. Don't lose your idea while you are writing. Try to express your idea, even if you want to use pictures to write your message. I don't know, but don't lose your idea. And then you try to repair, to paint that paper, to pay attention to the specific points, but don't lose the emotion, don't lose the idea, don't lose your perception. Yes, that is my big advice to this, or to our partners, because the trouble is when you lose the sense of the test. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I agree with you. I think what you're talking is what I think some writers, okay, so writers who write about writing, they talk about this writing flow. Okay, so some people talk about this, that when you have this writing flow, you just let the ideas flow. Okay, so write, and then you go back and edit and edit and edit. Okay, and review and change and try to organize. I know for some people this works. Other people are more like uh, what is the word? More organized. I'm not saying you are not organized because I know you. Okay, it's just like some people write like the outline, like a summary of the text first. So I'm going to write it up these, and
Uh,
then they start writing. It's
yeah, no,
another
no,
way.
and of course, Professor, it doesn't mean that
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to
Yeah.
write a blind, or that you need to write a draft, or and
Mm-hmm.
even to look for the references, the specific ideas that you want to to put there in the on the paper. Uh, I mean, when I am talking, I refer to the writing process, not the pre-writing process. It is the writing process
Understand.
when you already have the draft, the script, yes, and you said, oh well, now it's time to write about, because of course you need to know what are you going to talk about, what are you going to write about. On the contrary, yeah.
Okay, okay, I agree with you. I agree with you. You're right. Before I go back to Israel, I'd like to say here for those who are watching us on YouTube that if you have any questions, if you want to ask questions, please ask. Okay, and we are going to ask your questions here. You'll be participating, okay, of this talking here. So please do it. Okay, Israel, please.
Yes, I was thinking that some people are more methodical than others, me included. I'm quite methodical when I'm preparing my mind and my thoughts to write. I like to take a piece of paper or my tablet and write topics on it, and only then decide what I'm going to write about each of the topics I selected to talk about. But of course, everybody has a different approach to writing, and you have to use the best approach that is best for you, not the best approach that somebody else told you is the best. But I have to admit that I got carried out in Edison's words and ended up forgetting what the question was about. Could you repeat that for me, please?
Sure. So my question was, I asked you to share with us if you know what happens with your, for example, with I don't know if the correct word is classmates for doctorate. I don't know, but the people who are taking doctorate with you, again, literature, and who have to sometimes, if they do, maybe you tell me, no, Beatriz, you're wrong. They don't publish in English. They only publish in Portuguese because they do their research in using Portuguese texts or texts that were written in Portuguese, so they only write in Portuguese. But I'd like to know if you know friends of yours or even professors from Brazil, for example, as we are here in Brazil, so who have to or need to or want to publish in English their research on literature that was written in Portuguese. So what happens with them? For example, do they translate the texts that they analyze in the papers? Do they use the original text? Because this is an issue for us. For example, in applied linguistics, this was a discussion we had in our coordenação de letras estrangeiras. Okay, so foreign language coordination. If we were when the students quoted, when the students used Brazilian authors, so if they would maintain the original text in the middle of the text that's written in English, or if they would use a footnote, for example. Okay, so this is something that is, I think, is a big issue in literature. Am I wrong?
Possibly that is correct. Actually, I'd say that for myself, I prefer to write in Portuguese, an article in Portuguese. If I were writing about a Brazilian author or a Portuguese text, it makes more sense for me that I use the same language as I am analyzing. And if I have that choice, this is something that I definitely do. I know of my supervisor in Brazil that he did that. He wrote in English using Portuguese source. And what he did was to include the original text in the block quotation and then as a footnote translated. And I understand this is necessary because most people in the world don't speak Portuguese. And if you're writing in English, your intention is to make your article, your paper, more accessible for more people in the world. So if you want people to really go through your text and understand the message you're selling, I understand this is something you're going to have to do. You're going to have to include translations. For example, I know of a colleague of mine here at the University of Nottingham. She's not Brazilian, she's Russian actually. And she writes in English about Russian literature. And this is something she has to do, not only translate what she included in the block quotation, but she has to transliterate because Russian uses a different alphabet. So sometimes she's just using one single term in Russian, but she has to transliterate because most people in the world can't read Cyrillic, which is the alphabet used in Russian. So this is a difficult thing. All of us here study languages, so you know that translating is a very difficult task. I was talking to my wife the other day about some jokes we saw on television, and some jokes a friend of mine here in England told in English that we can't translate into Portuguese because it makes no sense. And there are many other jokes in Portuguese, especially jokes involving regions of Brazil. For example, jokes about people from the Northeast. It's not translatable, actually. You can't translate it. And if you do use words that carry similar meaning in English, it won't make sense for someone who just speaks English. It won't be funny at all. And the same happens in any other language. Some things, some expressions, not necessarily related to humor, that you can't translate and give the right feeling that the original piece of text has in the original language. So this is a big issue, actually. And I'd say that the way to tackle it would depend exactly on what text you're writing about. If I were to write, as I said, if I were to write something about Brazilian literature or any other kind of literature written in Portuguese, I'd prefer to write it in Portuguese. And the other way around as well is true, actually. I remember this one day I was teaching a class about science fiction, and most of the texts I was using were from Anglophone literature. So at the beginning of the class, I discussed with the students, is it okay if I teach in English, although we're all Brazilians here? What is the sense in teaching in English when everybody in the class is Brazilian. At first, it may make no sense, but because I was resorting to texts in English, to expressions in English, and to theorists who wrote in English originally, it would be impossible to translate that amount of text and that amount of information for just 1 hour class. So we all agreed that I should teach the whole class in English. So the thing is, if your audience is able to understand Portuguese, or if your audience is able to at least grasp the meaning of something you're writing about in Portuguese or Spanish or any other language, keeping it in the original language might be very interesting, might be very useful and effective, because you can make comments about it and people can understand what you mean without having to resort to your translation, your interpretation of the original text. And this is something I'm sure Edison also has come across as well, although he writes about linguistics. Resorting to translations, other people's translations or your own translations, is something that you'd rather avoid if you could. And I do too. If I can avoid translations, I do. And I remember back in my master's degree when we were attending classes with Professor Louis, that it was actually the doctoral classes. We were using texts that were translated from German to English and some from German to Portuguese. And we were dealing with somebody else's interpretation of that text, of the original text. German is a very expressive language, so many things get lost in translation very easily. And I kept making criticism about the translation. And Professor Louis kept agreeing with me, and people in the class kept arguing, oh, how can we work with these translations where there are so many questions raised by the choice of words the translators did? So this is a big issue. And I'd say you can talk about it, but you can't solve it at all. You have to decide what you're going to do based on what text you're dealing with and based on which questions you're answering to or which subjects you're discussing.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, very interesting. And I'm always checking here if there are questions on the chat. So please, if you have any questions, please ask. Okay, and I'd like to ask Edison. I'd like to ask you to comment about even more deeply about this issue of identity. And because we know that, I'd like both of you to answer this question, first Edison and then Israel, about if you ever faced, as academic researchers, so people who want to have their papers, of course, published, if you faced kind of, I would say, academic prejudice. I don't know if this word exists, but like because like I know that it's possible. Okay, I know an experience I will tell later about that. Involving literature, involving researching literature, but there are some journals that, for example, Israel said that first when I think in your first comment, that some journals wanted people to write only in their first language. So have you ever faced like these kind of prejudice that they wouldn't publish your text because there were, as we say in linguistics, there were many signs of language interference, mother language interference. So Portuguese in our case, Spanish in your case. So it was possible to notice in your text that it was not written by a foreigner. I always say that when people say that to me, I say, really? Imagine why. So because that's what happened. Okay, but have you ever faced that like this as an obstacle for publishing? And if you faced, What did you do? Do you understand my question? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting question, and I want to start even with my conclusion of this speech section, and it is: if you lose your identity, you are dead. Yes, and in that way, if you lose your identity, if you lose the sense, the emotions, those expressions, um, even when you are writing, I think you are you are not yourself. You are trying to imitate, to repeat something that those people consider they are better than us. Yeah, that is my perception. Because I don't refer to grammatical issues or that, for example, grammar issues that we know. For example, even throughout my speech, I am aware that I have some issues when I am speaking. For example, it's normally for me to say, she do, but I know that she does. But when I am speaking, I said, yeah, in some cases, yes. And in that way, when you are writing, of course, you need to analyze that there are some grammar skills, grammar fields that you need to follow because they are mistakes, because they are errors. Yes, in that way. But what I am trying to express here is the way you are expressing an idea. For example, if you go to an indigenous community and they try to tell you something in Spanish, and then you try to translate it in English to people to read, or that the native language is German. So look those processes to understand the real message. And even, professor, that I am thinking here, because some specific published houses, they are offering the possibility to write in different languages the same paper. Yes, and they offer that possibility. That is that inclusion. Yes. Okay. Yeah. The testimonials are in Spanish, so try to conserve the testimonials in Spanish. Yes. Or try that trust language inside the same text, and that is a very good strategy from my perspective. Yes, that I consider that is inclusion, because in some cases I try to express something in English, and for me it's difficult because I want to express it in Spanish. When you want to express something to your mother, in my case to my mother, even my mother could speak English, but I don't know, there are some specific things that you cannot express in that foreign or in that additional language, because they are part of your native. Native is so big. Native means that it's part of you. Yes. And even look at that specific expression. Additional is an addition,
Yeah.
or foreign is it is not part of you. So there are specific things that you need to consider by yourself. Express some ideas in Spanish for me makes me cry. And I could say the same in English, and I cannot feel the same.
I
And I could,
agree. Mm-hmm.
yes.
So continue. Sorry.
No. And that is something that I don't know, because it could be the same message. I could say, my dad, I really love you. My mother, I really love you. But it's not the same when I say, Padre, te amo. I don't know. Oh, Madre, te amo. Oh, that is something that I cannot describe in this moment, because
Okay.
but I could say it here that it is because it's my native language. In my native language, I could express even something that I was talking with a friend of mine here in Colombia, that and when we were exploring the colonial process, that coloniality, it's so difficult to the indigenous people when they received the or when they yes when the colonial and these European people came here. And what was the first thing? To eliminate, to delete the native language, to delete the native language. And deleting the native language is not just the linguistic field, it's deleting, it's eliminating the culture, the feelings, the emotions, the possibility of crying while you are speaking. That that is the specific things that you delete.
Very interesting. Very good. Yeah. Um, people, people who are watching us, we are not saying here that you're not supposed to write in English, okay? Or that
Of
Edson
course not.
mentioned. Yes, Edson mentioned
Of course
here.
not.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. You said that your identity doesn't mean you infer that, doesn't mean that you have the right, okay, or the permission to write using like not the English syntactic structure. You have to, and you have to know the rules. You have to review your paper, as we have to review our papers when we write in Portuguese too. When you write in Spanish, I believe you have to review. You have to check if it is according to the academic Spanish, for example, to the more formal Spanish. That's not what we're saying here. Okay, what we are saying, I think, is what Kanagaraja mentioned when in his last lecture that we had at our group from Universidade de Brasília, and he mentioned that he in academic writing we should be allowed to do translanguaging when it's necessary, because there are some terms that belong to that culture, belong to that language, and that cannot be translated, because if you translate them you would lose not only your identity, but as you said, your emotion. It wouldn't be yourself. So I believe that an idea, a solution for that would do the translanguaging. So have the text there written in, for example, in Portuguese or in English or in Spanish or in another language that you're using, in the middle of the text, and having a footnote or having an explanation for. Of course, we may have readers who wouldn't understand if we just left the expression in another language there. But I also remember this Edson. It was very, I agree with you, and this is something that I remember with a lot of emotion. Well, a very good friend of mine who works at the U.S. consulate here in Brazil, in Recife, in Pernambuco, and he's married to a Brazilian woman, and he's been living in Brazil for many years. And he speaks Portuguese very well, even though he's from the United States, but he speaks Portuguese very well. And I asked him, because I know that he got married to a Brazilian woman, and they have two children, two daughters, and I think they're now like 10, 15, something like this. So I asked him if they were bilingual, and if he only spoke to them in English in the house, or if they did like a translanguaging or like bilingual home, something like this. And he told me that his children nowadays they speak English because now they are older, but when they were small he only spoke in Portuguese to them. Why? Because for him it was like the most beautiful thing in the world to listen to his daughter saying pai. Painho, I don't know if you understand. Painho is like little daddy, like daddy, papai, little pequeno papa. But it's a way that they use, especially in Pernambuco here. So they say mainha, painho. And he said, no, I wanted my children to call me painho. I didn't want them to call me daddy. And see, daddy, I think daddy is a word that carries a lot of affection too. But for him, it didn't work as well as pai. Okay, so I think this is a good example of what you're saying. So some words are very some things we want to express, they are related to our emotions in a language. So it would be a kind of violence maybe maybe I'm exaggerating, but a little bit, to say that you had to speak only English, for example, in a text, because it's academic. But I don't know. So, Israel, what do you think? What do you have to say about this? Because I know that at the beginning it was interesting for me what you said, that some papers wouldn't accept authors to write in another language, not in their first language. So, how is this nowadays in literature? What can you tell us about that?
Before getting to that, I'd like
Okay.
to add something to the topic you were talking about. I guess what you guys mean, and can give you two examples that illustrate that very, very well. One example is me and my wife in here in England. We only talk to each other in Portuguese, but when we were surrounded by friends, we talk obviously to each other in English, because we want our friends to get part of the conversation and they only speak English. But with a minor detail, there is a word, a name, a couple's name that are used to refer to her in a lovely way. And I don't translate that word, I don't translate that name. Although I'm talking in English among friends, I always refer to her using that name in Portuguese. And there is a possibility of translating it into English. But the cultural charge and the emotional charge that this word is imbued of can't be translated. So the word only has the same level of affection, the same level of emotion, if spoken in Portuguese. And this is the first example I mentioned that can illustrate what you guys were talking about very well. The second example is when I was an exchange student in the United States of America a few years ago in Miami. I made friends with these two brothers that were American. They were native speakers of English, but they had a Mexican descent. So they spoke both English and Spanish very well, to the level of a native speaker. And it was interesting, this one night, they are taking me back home after a friend's party, very small party, and they are taking me back home. And in the car, these two brothers were talking to each other, code switching, which means they would start the sentence in English and then change to Spanish without even noticing it. And it was an amazing thing to watch, because they would understand each other very well with no difficulties. Although he started the sentence in English and switched to Spanish and back to English and back to Spanish again, they would respond to each other the same way. And at a certain point in the travel back home, they realized I was there and they apologized. Oh, we are doing this in front of you, and we just forgot you were here and you can't understand Spanish. To which I respond, no, I can understand Spanish, and I'm finding this experience amazing. Let me be part of it. And I started doing the exactly same thing, switching from English to Spanish and back to English again. And I even proposed, if you guys are up to it, we could add another language to the game. And it was a very, very interesting experience to be part of. So this illustrates very well what you guys were talking about. There are some words, some expressions in English that for those guys made more sense in English than in Spanish. But because they had this bilingual background, there were also other expressions and words in Spanish that made more sense to them in Spanish. And they didn't even realize that. They weren't aware of that fact. So they kept code switching from English to Spanish all the time without even realizing that it was so natural for them. So that illustrates, these two examples illustrate very well what you guys were talking about. And now back to the subject you mentioned about linguistic prejudice in journals. Have I faced that in my own experience? Yes, and ironically, it was because of Brazilian journals. the demand that I should write in my own language was from Brazilian journals. I've never found anything remotely similar to that in any other journals except the Brazilian ones. And I think nowadays, even the Brazilian ones are not like that anymore. But the paper I first published in English was actually in a foreign journal, an English journal. And of course, there were a few points in my writing that required attention, and they proofread it for me and sent it back to me so that I could check the recommendations. But even so, there were space for me to write, arguing against their recommendations. It wasn't like, oh, this little part you wrote is wrong, you have to change this into that. No, it was a recommendation. No, maybe it would be clearer if you wrote this part like this. What do you think? And of course, if I disagreed, I would have to defend my point. I would have to make a stand. And so I did many times. Many times when suggestions are made, I have two choices. I can either accept it and just be silent, or I can not accept it, and then I have to defend my point. Why don't I agree with this recommendation? And this is a natural thing, actually. Peer reviewing is a natural thing in academia. This is something you would expect if you write in your own language, in your native language. There are slips you may make while writing in Portuguese. That's a natural thing. And it is actually a very good thing that there is someone to read your paper, proofread it, and make recommendations about how you could improve the clarity of your language. So even if I write in Portuguese, I usually have friends read the paper back to me. Sometimes if I don't have any other friends around, I make use of my own wife. She speaks English as well. She speaks Portuguese as well. So I read what I write to her, and sometimes I even have the computer read it back to me, because it's a natural thing to make mistakes. It's a natural thing to make slips. And even native speakers of English, they're not perfect. I'm not perfect in Portuguese. I make mistakes all the time in Portuguese, and some mistakes are even understood by native speakers of Portuguese as acceptable. For example, you know the correct way to speak is to use the verb in the second person, for example, the second person singular. You have to use the right ending, but you don't. You use the third person with the second person, and that's a natural mistake, actually. It's not a slip. You're aware that that is an error, and nonetheless you speak like that all the same. And there are all sorts of similar things in English as well. For example, in this region of England, I've come to realize that people have this little feature of language in which they use an R to connect words in a sentence when a word ends in a vowel sound and the next word starts with a vowel sound. They use an R that doesn't exist in real language, not real language, this is real language. It doesn't exist in formal language, but they do it. And it's a natural mistake that if you don't make the same mistake, people will notice that you speak differently, but because you're speaking actually correctly, and they notice the difference. And I was talking to a friend at the university about that one feature, and I asked him, have you ever realized that people in this region of England do this? And he stopped to think, oh, I do that. Oh, yes. Yeah, I realize it's not correct, but people do it all the time. For example, you probably don't know this is a very typical bird of this region. It's a magpie. But for example, I saw a magpie at the backyard. I saw a magpie at the backyard. Of course, I say I saw a. I make this glottal stop between saw and a. But people in here, they say sora. They use this R to connect the words. And this is viewed as a natural mistake. It is a mistake nonetheless, but that's okay. People make it. And in all of England, people say, there's people here waiting for you. There's people here waiting for you. Of course, everybody knows the correct way to say it is there are people, but that's okay because it's a natural mistake. So there are all sorts of natural mistakes that you can make while speaking or while writing, that people may point to you, back to you, and that's okay as well. I've never actually had any paper rejected on the basis of bad writing, let's say like that. And I'm aware that I make mistakes when I write. I know that because the proofreaders point those mistakes back to me. So this is not a reason why I shouldn't write in English or I shouldn't write in Portuguese either. This is a natural thing that everybody is subject to, is susceptible to. And today, for example, I was messaging a friend here in English, a native speaker of English, and he made a mistake. And he corrected himself and actually wrote a KKKK to express that he was realizing he made a mistake in front of a non-native speaker of English. That's okay as well. Mistakes are part of life. Errors are part of life. And I don't think anyone should refrain themselves from writing in any language they want to or they need to, because they're going to make mistakes.
Okay, so very interesting. I love that, Isora. Very nice, very, very nice. This is, for me, this is an example of regionalism. Okay, so it's a kind of original use of the language that we have this in all the world. For example, you know that I'm from São Paulo. I've been living here. I love Piauí. I've been living here for 13 years now. But I remember that when I was here, I had been here for a short time. I used to talk to people here from Piauí. I remember I asked a student that at UFP. I asked him, why do you deny twice? Why do you deny twice in a sentence? And the student said, what do you mean? And I said, you do this. For example, tu não quer não? So why no and no again? I get confused. Like at first I didn't know if I was supposed to accept or not. When people, like for example, I visit people in their homes and they offered me things, I never knew if I was supposed to accept it or not. So for example, they said, "Tu não quer bolo não?" I would be like, okay, should I say yes or no now? I don't know if it's polite to say yes, I want a cake, and I wanted most of the time, but like I didn't know if I could do that. And so it was interesting because they didn't realize that. And it's not a way that people speak in São Paulo. For me, this was something that really amazed me at first. Nowadays, I do that. When I'm speaking Portuguese here in Piauí, I use that. And when I go to São Paulo, sometimes I do that too. So it's interesting because I got the habit, but this is something that is related to the culture here, to the identity here. And something that is like has been interesting for me as someone from another state living here in Piauí was that once another professor, a history professor from UFP, he once told I had a meeting with him, a work meeting, and when I sat down to start talking, he said, okay, and I think there was another person there, because he said, okay, then so Bia, you see, Bia starts talking with a conclusion. And I said, what? What do you mean? And he said, because you always start like, então. And this is so São Paulo. We do that a lot in São Paulo. We start talking like this. We want to approach a subject, discuss something, and we start então. So this is something I think related to what we are talking here. This would be difficult to be translated. Okay, it would be difficult for people to understand that. For example, if I had to write this about this phenomenon in English, it would be complicated. I could explain, but I don't know if my readers would understand me. So this would be difficult. I have a question for both of you. Once, this was not a long time ago. I'm not going to mention the names, of course, But a friend of mine who is a literature, also a literature doctorate candidate, he had he wrote a paper in English. No, he wrote a paper in Portuguese. Sorry, he's not an English professor. So he wrote his paper in Portuguese. He co-authored the paper. The other author was his advisor, and they wrote in Portuguese. And the journal, the Brazilian journal in which they published the paper, required the paper to be in two languages, Portuguese and English. Okay, this is a requirement of that journal, and it's highly evaluated journal here in Brazil in literature. So he asked me if I could do the translation for them from Portuguese to English. He speaks English, but he was not confident enough to write the paper, to translate the paper into English. So he asked me to translate it for them. I did. But when I was in the middle of the process, he said to me that the paper had communicated with them that they wouldn't accept my translation because I was not an English native speaker. They wanted a translation from a native, an English native speaker. So then they were angry about that because that was not said before. And so they had a kind of argument about that with the people from the journal. And they got to an agreement that I would finish the translation and they would pay a proofreader from the journal, that was not from the journal, but someone that is kind of worked with the journal, who's a native speaker. Okay, because at least that, otherwise they wouldn't publish. He told me that, and he was angry, and I said that's their rules. So I don't know. For me this is complicated, but I'm not going to. I don't know what to say. I told him I'm not going to tell you that I agree with that, but at the same time, I'm not going to tell you not to do that because I think you need to publish. So I don't know, whatever you decide. And he said, okay, after some time, he said, okay, we are going to pay for the proofreader. And I said, okay, I want to see it. I want to see this person's comments on my translation because I want to learn from my mistakes. Of course, as Israel said, nobody's perfect. Nobody writes a perfect text, I think. I don't know anybody who does. Sorry if there is anybody here. I don't know. Okay, so I said, okay, I want to learn from my mistakes, so please later. And as you said, Israel, most comments were related to like suggestions. This is not wrong, but it would be better this way, something like that. There were some mistakes, okay, that the proofreader corrected, and I appreciated reading those. But I'd like to know, what do you think of that, if you could? So what do you think? What's your opinion? Edson, please go ahead.
Well, those are those specific situations that I don't agree. For example, it is something similar happened here in Colombia, specifically in a program. It was focusing on promoting the teaching and learning English inside the schools. They invite some specific native speakers of English, and some people, even politician people, pretend to promote that those native speakers, they are better than the English teachers, that they are not native speakers. Yes, and that happened a lot because even those native speakers received a higher salary, though, just because they are native speakers. And on the other hand, in some cases, even just because you are a native speaker, you could teach English, and it doesn't mean that you need a degree, a diploma, or yes, or the pedagogical specific, the pedagogical, preparation. So in that way, I'm not here to pretend or to say that we don't need to follow the recommendation of the native speakers. Yes, but they don't. I don't know. They, for my opinion, they also need to consider our English, because that's why we are talking nowadays about Englishes. Because on the contrary, try to establish the recommendations and said, okay, you are going to write a paper to this specific population, and you need to simulate this specific language. You need to imitate this language. You need to follow this language. And of course, it's so hard. It's so hard because in that way, we could talk different Englishes, the Colombian English, the Brazilian English, of course. And of course, we need to follow that structure. But as Israel said, of course, it's a specific population and a specific culture. And if we go in and analyze from the variationism, yes, those sociolinguistic processes, we analyze different essence, different ways of expressing an idea, different perceptions. And in that way, so we need to follow that specific path, that specific ways. And it's, for my opinion, we need to negotiate. We need to make a balance, because the problem here is to pretend that they have the priority. They have the priority. And I said here, guys, and people who is attending this conference, obviously the problem is not that we cannot, or we are not pretending here that writing in English is bad. No, you could write in English because it's necessary. Yes, because we could expand our point of view, but try to consider that there is not just 2 or 3 English. There are Englishes, and we need to be aware about that. Yes, we need to be aware about that. And also, it is the same professor, coming back to the discussion about identity. I have a trouble with those people who ask me, okay, please don't write using I. So, sorry, don't write using I. So who is writing? Is a robot? Is a third person? So it's my paper. So I have a trouble on that. And so, unfortunately, there are some specific paradigms and perceptions, magazines who accept it. And I saw very interesting authors expressing from my point of view, yes, or even I found that this study, for example, or this instrument or this technique, I don't know, but that is something, because I remember when I was from the very beginning of my degree, when I was studying, it was in the ESP program, and when people say no, because if you write in I using I is unpolite. Sorry, unpolite writing using I? No, that is something that we need to reconsider, of course, because of course we analyze and we recognize that it's an academic style, this is an academic writing, and we follow some recommendations. But when I need to express something about myself, and I said the author found, that is like a wall here, So that is something to reconsider. And I also agree with Israel when he talked about the peer reviewers. Of course, we need to have another voice, another recommendation. And that proofreading process is necessary. A suggestion is necessary, of course. A suggestion is necessary. And And I really appreciate, for example, that magazine who asked him, okay, please, yeah, this is a recommendation. Do you agree? If you don't disagree, if you disagree, please tell us why do you disagree? Because this is a negotiation. But immediately when you said, no, just because Professor Gama is not a native speaker, so she is not able to do the translation. So we need to replace, we need to rethink, we need to go beyond and analyze, well, so what is the English that you want? What is the English that you prioritize? Because it's so difficult to understand that is the things that I start like a hot because because it's a kind of difficult professor to analyze and to find those kind of things. It happens the same, for example, with Spanish. Now, if you are not from Spain, your Spanish is not acceptable.
Yes. Yes, I know that. I know. Even here in Brazil, there's some people who say that I've heard that the Spanish from Spain is better than the Spanish from South America, from the other countries here. I say, what is better for whom? Okay, what do you mean? Like why? Why? Right? I think the question is why. I like what you said about negotiating. I agree with you. Okay, when it's possible, I think you should do that. And
Sure.
okay, let's listen to Israel on that.
Yeah, in my experience, I've been lucky to come across people that are very reasonable when it comes to varieties of English. And of course, we have to understand that in addition to native varieties of English, like the English spoken in Scotland, the English spoken in England, there are varieties of no-native speakers of English. There is Brazilian English, there is Colombian English, and that's okay. This variety is important. And actually, the language as an entity, the English language as an entity, realizes that diversity is important. And that's why English is one of the languages that has the most loanwords in the world. This one friend of mine who works in Canada, he's Canadian, he wrote an entire book about new loanwords, neologisms, imported from other languages. And many of the languages he imported the words from are not well known internationally. They are taken by many as exotic languages. But I do realize that many native speakers of English ignore the fact that there are varieties of English other than their own variety of English. And I realized that again when I was in the United States of America a few years ago, that I had this one professor that kept correcting me. Of course, to this point, you guys must have realized that my English tends to British English. And this one professor kept correcting me whenever I said words like process. She would say process. I would say proverb. She would say proverb, because she didn't know there were another variety of English in which the pronunciation process was acceptable. So one thing I did, I helped her. I downloaded a pronouncing dictionary and played the recording in British English to her. And then she realized that I wasn't mistaken. I was just speaking a different variety of English. And when you get to travel to other countries, especially countries that speak English as a first language, you get to realize how drastically different English can be. 2 weeks ago, my wife and I were in Edinburgh, in Scotland, and we realized how drastically different English can be. And they were native speakers of English. And their accent, which is not only an accent anymore, it's a dialect already, is it acceptable as English? Of course it is. And as I said, I don't know if I've been lucky this far, but I've come across people that understand it most of the times. I've come across people who understand this fact of language. Language is about diversity. There are different varieties of English, and there is your own English. You as a person, you speak your own language. You speak your Portuguese, you speak your English. It's full of idiosyncrasies. They're all your own language, and that's okay. But when it comes to academia, again, in my experience, I've come to meet people that are not native speakers of English here in England and work as teachers of English. For example, the head of department of the School of English in the University of Birmingham, she's not a native speaker of English. Of course, her English is flawless when it comes to grammar accuracy and pronunciation accuracy. It's flawless, it's perfect. It sounds native, but she's not a native speaker of English anyway. She probably, if I talked to her enough, I'd pick some inaccuracy in her language, possibly. But this far, I haven't. The thing is, she works as a head of department of the School of English at a British university, a very famous British university, the University of Birmingham, and that's okay. And I know this one professor at the University of Nottingham as well. He works as an English teacher, and he's not native. And he has a very prominent, a very thick accent. His original accent is thick, but it doesn't compromise understanding. So I guess people just accept it because that's an international English. You can understand him very well, but as soon as he starts speaking, you can realize he's not a native speaker. And he doesn't make an effort to show that he is a native speaker of English. As he said, his English is meant for understanding and communication. And he is very successful in that. And he teaches a discipline called Improve Your Pronunciation. And he teaches how to improve your pronunciation accuracy, although he's not a native speaker of English. I understand this is a very clarified, enlightened, and very developed opinion that these people at the University of Nottingham have when it comes to language proficiency. And I also understand there has to be a standard. Although this guy I mentioned, this one professor, he's from Africa. I can't recall the country right now, but his language is drastically different from anything you guys in here, in this audience, have probably ever heard when it comes to language. His language is full of those clicks and glottis stops, totally unpronounceable for me. I tried a few words. I just can't speak his language. And there are a few interferences, if you can call that, from his native language into his English, but it never impairs understanding. And that's what matters in the end. Communication is what matters in the end. And in here, I noticed that that's how people see things. They see that communication and understanding is the most important thing when it comes to speaking a different language. Any language, doesn't matter if it is English or any other language, what matters is communication. If he is effective in communicating his ideas, if his accent doesn't interfere with other people understanding what he means, what he's speaking, that's okay. That's okay to have an accent. I have an accent, and that's okay. People can understand me here. I don't talk to people and they keep asking me to repeat what I said, so that means they understand me very well. So that probably means my English is good enough for oral communication. And when it comes to writing, the same thing applies. Although there might be something that I need to clarify in my writing, that's okay as well. Because sometimes you write and what you wrote is clear to you because you already know what you meant. But it's just not clear enough for other people who don't know what you actually meant. And that's okay for people to point what in your writing is not clear enough and even suggest that you change something to make it clearer. That's okay. And this is something that actually I like the most about academia, that I can write my pieces of text, submit to a journal, and people will read it for free and proofread it for free and suggest that I change things to make it better. I really like that about academia. And again, in my own experience, so far, every time I submit a paper and it comes back with suggestions, this one bit is true. I've never submitted a paper that didn't come back with suggestions of improvement. It always happens. And that's how I like it. Because although I submit it, I know that there is something that I can't tell what, that should be improved. And I submit it in hopes that someone will pick that up and point it to me. So this is something I really love about academia, is submitting the paper and getting it back with suggestions and improving it, improving the original over the original. And this usually means that in the end, I will have a better paper than the one I submitted previously.
Thank you very much. That was very, very nice, I think. I'm reading here from the chat. There are comments here that I think we should pay attention, like what Edison mentioned about using the first person singular. Okay, this is an issue I think that has to be discussed in academia, because I agree with you. For example, I wrote my doctorate dissertation in the first person singular because I was talking about my experiences as a professor with my students. It was a research action. Okay, so it was an action research. It was an action research. Okay, so I had to use first person. I remember when I started writing it and I gave it to my dear advisor using we in the first versions of the paper. And she said, Beatriz, who is we? And I said, I don't know. I'm using it because I have been taught to do that, because like it's the here in Brazil we say it's the modesty pronoun, the modesty voice. So instead of saying I, you say we. Okay, and maybe you prefer that because you are my advisor, so you would be part of my writing as well. And she said, no, it's your research, it's not mine, so use I. If you want to, you use I. And I said, I want to. Okay, and then I used I, my dissertation. But I know that this is an issue that's in some maybe in some journals they still don't accept. Okay, and maybe some advisors even say that to their advisees not to do that. Okay, so this is an issue I think that should be discussed, as Marcela said here, especially when we have also ethnographic research. So as you said, Edison, we are talking about our experiences. We are analyzing, so it would be fake, right? How could I talk about my experiences using the researcher thinks so? Who is the researcher? So it would be like, I'm going to say that here. Okay, like saying like I'm not Pelé, to use the third person singular, right? To talk about myself. Because this is famous in Brazil, that Pelé uses the third person singular to talk about himself. So instead of say I, he says Pelé does this, Pelé did that. Okay, and I always say I'm not Pelé. Okay, I'm Beatriz, so I use I. But this is something now. I think we have to go now to the finish here. So let's talk about why. Why do you publish in English? Because I know both of you publish in English. Why do you do that? Why? What is the reason for that? And is it good? Is it difficult? Why? Why do you do that? Anybody?
I go first, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay.
Well, I'll go first.
Mhm.
Okay. I have to admit, I've always had a passion for languages, and English in special. So I like writing in English. That's the truth. Even if I didn't have to, I'd probably do it because I like it. I also like to write in Portuguese, but there is something about writing in English that I probably like more than in Portuguese. Don't know exactly what. But anyway, I've been writing in English for so long that nowadays I think I write in English even better than I do in Portuguese. Maybe not in terms of grammar, maybe they are equal in terms of grammar. But in terms of engaging language, in terms of making it sound interesting, maybe it has to do with the subject I write about, maybe. Maybe it has to do with the fact that I've been reading more in English than in Portuguese for quite long. I don't know, but I like writing in English. And of course, it's difficult. Sometimes I am here at my desk and I keep thinking about what should I write now for hours and hours and hours, and I don't come to anything. This is called the author's block. It's a real thing, and it happens to many people, and that's okay. It's natural. And sometimes I wake up in the morning knowing exactly what I will write, and I write and I write and I write to the point that my fingertips get hurting because I've typed too much during the day, and the following day I can't write a line, and that's okay as well. So it's difficult. Writing at all is difficult. It doesn't matter if you're writing in your own language or if you're writing in another language, it will be difficult. It will hurt sometimes, but in the end, when you finish a text and you get to read it and you get to look at it and see that it paid off all your effort, it's a very fuzzy feeling that you can't get enough of.
Very nice. I think, Israel, you have acquired maybe an English persona in writing, okay, in academic writing, probably like a Fernando Pessoa. So you have like this persona that you have acquired. I don't know, but I agree with you. For me nowadays, it's easier to write academically in English. I think because my research is using English. So I use English all the time. So it would be difficult to write in Portuguese. Okay, but let's listen to Edison.
I'm gonna try to follow that speech. And when I start writing in English, it is because I found a lot of, well, I work with EFL, yes, in English teaching processes, literacy, digital literacy, critical digital literacy. That is the field. And for being honest, when I try to find any information regarding to, for example, critical digital literacy in Spanish, or specifically in Spanish, I don't find a lot of information regarding to this specific topic, and we need to accept that in English you could find yes, more papers, yes, a lot of information regarding to some topics, specifically in this topic that I am studying nowadays. So in that way, for me, it's a kind of difficult to write something in a language and to try to to talk about that specific content in another language. That happened to me. So I read in English and I prefer writing in English. Sorry, I read, yes, writing in English. In Spanish, do you remember, for example, Professor, when we were discussing the theories of Catherine Walsh, yes, from the colonialidad, and it was so difficult to me to talk about the colonialidad in Portuguese, even in Portuguese. That I prefer to talk in Spanish about that. And on the other hand, it also I really love languages, and also the variation of the language. Yes, even I used to work with friends even from here from Colombia. They live in the coast, they live in the center of the city, they live in the capital, and they have different accent. And I try to analyze to recognize those specific variations, yes, and changes about that. So English is a very good language to communicate and be heard around the world. We need to accept that. Yes, because there are a lot of people who communicate with English nowadays, and we need to follow that path. Even if you want to talk about the coloniality, yes, you need to use the English as a tool, as an instrument to contrast that specific colonial processes. Yes, because English is a tool to express ideas, emotions, as we were talking about. The English is just the tool, it's just the medium to express. And there are a lot of people who use that medium nowadays, and we need to follow that path, but also without without pretending that our native language is inferior to that language. Yes, so that is like in my case, I used to be critical about the English language processes, using the English as a tool to contrast those realities, and that's why I am using this language.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to know if you have any final comments. The comments here on the chat were like some things that you mentioned here. Also, they are acknowledging that it happened to them. They happened to them too. So, but I'd like to know if you have any final comments to make.
Yes, I'd like to thank you wholeheartedly for this wonderful chat we've had today. The invitation was very kind of you. This sharing of experiences is a very important thing. I wish I had that earlier. I wish I could have watched people sharing their experiences like this is happening now before. But I hope that this little chat we had today will help some other people to advance in their writing careers and avoiding some obstacles that Edison and I might have in the past. And I hope this little chat we had will help people improve in their own writing journey in the future. And thank you very much, Professor Beatriz. Thank you very much, Professor Edison, for this wonderful conversation we had today.
I am the one who would like to thank you. Okay, it was really nice. Edison, please.
Now, first of all, I want to thanks to all the directive processes of the University of Piauí specifically, and obviously the Iowa University. Yeah, Iowa. Yes, yes, yes. And it is amazing how these kind of meetings could give us, we as researchers, students, to contrast our points of view, and of course to discuss from different perspectives about our research in studies. And we really hope, I really hope this is not the last section where I am discussing with Professor Gamma, Professor Israel. It was an honor. I learned a lot from you today. Yes, from your points of view, discussions, and of course, people who contribute with their comments also gave us good reflections about. So, thank you a lot for the invitation, and also to Josepha, who started with this initiative. Thank you with this proposal. And well, yes, that's everything.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank all of you here on YouTube who are watching us. Thank you very much. And I hope this is a first event. I hope in the next event, you, the ones who are watching and are not presenting, may be here presenting, please. And I hope this little chat we had here may help others here to understand that everybody can. Okay? like being Obama here. Yes, we can. Okay, so we have to think like that. We are not native English native speakers. We are not. But we can, if we want to, we can write in English. It's a process. It is not easy, but it is possible, as it is in any other language you want to. Okay, so it's a process of learning, it's a process of practicing, of reviewing. Okay, so I hope we have done that. We have encouraged people here to publish, please. Publish, publish in English or in other language, please.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Josivan.